Here's some news for you this morning. Alcohol sales dropped off last year. That's according to new data from Statistics Canada. Across the board, sales fell by 1.2%. Wine taking the biggest hit, with volume per person sales dropping 4%, and beer sales not that far behind. They took a hit of 2.8%. With us this morning is Dan Malik. He's a professor of health sciences at Brock University and an expert on alcohol regulation and policy. Welcome to your morning. Cheers.
Thank you. Glad to be here. Thank you.
Statistics
a little
Canada.
early for cheers.
Well, depends where you live. Statistics Canada says that we shouldn't necessarily make the inference that people are drinking less because those numbers don't include things like home brewing kits, which have become popular. So are we consuming overall less alcohol now than we were 5 years ago?
Yeah, it looks like the data suggests that we are, although I think a lot of these sharp declines are pandemic related. Remember, this data ends in March 2022, which is just as the main effect of Omicron started to wane. So we're seeing a lot of things like the decline in wine could very well be simply because people weren't going out to restaurants and having wine, or not taking wine to parties because they weren't having parties, things like that. Or even big events like weddings and that may have been smaller, so there was less purchasing of those sorts of of wine, champagne, stuff like that. But yeah, it does look like this is part of an overall decline in well, I can't say if it's a decline in drinking or just a generational change, right? Where we have an older generation that may have drunk more, that may not be around as many people around anymore, and a younger generation, like we know that the Gen Z cohort are drinking less. So it could be more about that.
Yeah, let's dig into that a little bit. Wine and beer sales are falling off, as you say, but other drinks are seeing an uptick, like coolers and ciders, for example. Those have really taken off. Over the past 3 years, on record, their market share has grown from 5.3% to 8%. That's a big jump. Why do you think that we're seeing a shift in preferences?
Yeah, that's a really interesting one. And the problem with that data is that we don't know the difference between cider and coolers and those, those pre-mixed drinks. Like you can get a can of rum and Coke or a mojito or something like that. And I think those are two very different types of drinks. It could, again, be, there has been a push from the industry for these products. You see them at the cash registers and stuff like that, some of these pre-mixed drinks. But we also have a huge increase in craft cider drinking and the craft cider business. So there could be people who would normally have wanted something local and artisan but didn't like beer, and now they have craft cider, or they tended towards sort of bland or mass market lagers and stuff like that, but then they found that cider fulfilled a refreshing beverage for them. Or it could even be something like people were deprived of their cocktails because they weren't going to bars, so they were buying these cocktails, right, and having them with friends or having them at home. So it's really, that's a really interesting trend, and it certainly began before the pandemic, but it really did take a sharp uptick during under this new data.
I wonder, too, if that will continue to see that, just given the cost of everything. I mean, go to a restaurant, a cocktail is $20. You buy it at the, at the liquor store, it's a lot cheaper when you get it from a can. But beer, we know, is still the most popular alcoholic beverage in terms of market share. But that, too, is declining. In the past decade, the market share for beer has dropped 8.8%. Do you see this trend spelling trouble for the burgeoning craft industry?
I don't know if it is trouble for the craft industry. When we look at decline in beer sales, we have to parallel it with the growth of the craft industry taking a chunk out of the mass market beer sales, right? And I've been trying to find data for the last 2 years, and it's not really clear, but before and into the beginning of the pandemic, craft had continued to take a bigger piece of that market. It may be it may be a decline in mass market beer, where people are choosing other things like those pre-mixed cocktails or cider, or it could be what some people predicted would happen during the pandemic, which is craft is just really falling off because of limited access. If you're a craft brewer who mostly was selling kegs, you're ending up with, during the pandemic, you weren't selling a lot of drafts, right, when bars were closed.
Dan, thanks so much for this. It's fascinating to look a little closer into those numbers about maybe not drinking less, just drinking different things. Thanks for coming on this morning.
Yeah, my pleasure. Cheers.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you liked this, be sure to subscribe here, or you can check out more Your Morning videos right here.